It has to come from within. It has to come from the engagement of what's within with what's without. The spark comes in what we call the transaction. If I were to say it comes from without, I immediately create a dualism, that there is an inner and an outer.
Right.
And I think of them like this, I'm very interested in how it works in me as a work of art. Why I think about it at night, why I say, what is this experience? And Dewey used to say that a work of art is only completed, if it is ever completed, when you ponder it, when you reflect upon it later, I think. And I think some of you know, we're sponsoring this by a small foundation that we've been trying to start on art, imagination, and social imagination. We're trying, and we will be trying, to support young artists and writers and photographers in process of making something that have some social meaning.
Not only in the United States, educators have suffered a history of curriculum development predicated primarily on functionality. Over the past century, there have been several such formulations in the United States. Each is associated with a key theoretician that link the school curriculum to the economy and to society. In both cases, these links are future bound. Although curriculum conservatives focused on ancient languages and cultures did survive in the US through the 1920s, resurfacing briefly but mostly rhetorically in the 1980s. Latin, for example, disappeared primarily as a secondary school subject by the Great Depression. To achieve these functional objectives, curriculum development became primarily procedural and systematized, starting with objectives, and thanks to Ralph Tyler, ending with assessment. In linking objectives to assessment, teaching was reduced to implementation. Severed from schools by the Kennedy administration's 1960s national curriculum reform, curriculum development as an academic specialization gave way, in the United States at least, to understanding curriculum. Curriculum reform gave way to concern not with the intellectual content of the curriculum, as it tended to be in 1960s curriculum reform, but with so-called standards during the 1980s. The rhetorical preoccupation with standards gave way to accountability since 2001, the 2001 inauguration of George W. Bush. Curriculum reform has been replaced by what I call school deform, kind of wordplay, in which the centerpiece of the school, its curriculum, is rendered only a means to an end, and those are student scores on standardized tests. While globalization has accelerated trends toward curricular standardization, driven by presumably culture-free, so-called skills-based competencies called for by the so-called global marketplace, it has hardly expunged what is distinctive in local, regional, and national life. Even the same curriculum concepts connote different realities given the distinctiveness of our national and regional situations. And in 5, 2 of which are now ongoing, studies I have attempted to portray this fact. For example, while a curriculum of functionality driven by exams was instituted in post-apartheid South Africa, it was perceived, at least at first, not as the handmaiden of international corporations and right-wing politicians, as in fact it is in the United States, but of democratization and black empowerment.
There's a lot that one can learn by studying what goes on in psychology, sociology, in the sciences, in social studies and history and so forth. But there's also a lot that can be learned from the arts as they're practiced and as they're taught that might find utility in these more academic fields, if I can put it that way for a moment. So the idea that a legal brief can be a work of art is an idea that I accept. And so the aim of education is to prepare people who can function as artists in whatever arena they happen to be in. It's a very deep and demanding ambition. This state of affairs ought to pervade our schools. So schools become, in effect, studios for making things that are beautiful. There's so much in school where uniformity of outcome is the aspiration. In the arts, it's just the opposite. What you want is heterogeneity. You want diversity. You want idiosyncrasy. You don't want 30 yellow ducks made by 30 kids in the 4th grade all looking alike. That's an artistic pedagogical disaster. See, a spelling teacher doesn't want their students to be innovative. That's not the location for it. It's uniform. It's uniform. In art, it's just the opposite. Is that the arts can teach people working in other fields that learning to express something often deals with what cannot be said. What cannot be said. What goes in to the arts in their making and in their perception is, when it's done well, very sophisticated forms of cognition. And that since children learn what they have an opportunity to do, they ought to have an opportunity to paint and to see and to make things as beautifully as they can. And that the effective art teacher, whether he's in or she's in science or in the visual arts, makes that kind of accomplishment possible. And when it takes, it becomes a set of resources that they can use through the rest of their life.